Hello and welcome to Groovecast, the podcast for the rhythm section with me, Ashley Walker.
And me, Charlie Smith.
And in today's episode, we're going to kind of be talking about recording and touching on some things that we might have talked about before and some new stuff in the pipeline. But first off, I think we need to sort of say thanks to everybody who's watched our last couple of episodes with the great Steve Pierce. They were pretty cool, weren't they, Charlie?
Yeah, what an honour to get a session legend on our porky little podcast.
Yeah, and we got some great stories out of him and some advice as well. So if you haven't seen those couple of episodes already, definitely go ahead and check them out. After you've listened to this one, of course.
Yeah, naturally.
Or before, if you're going to listen to this one, but you have to promise to listen to this one after.
Yeah, come back. Don't forget.
So in today's episode, we're going to talk about, as I said, recording and for me, kind of the writing and recording process, because as Charlie's aware, you've been part of is working on my next sort of album and solo project, and as part of that sort of process, we did some stuff that I haven't done before, which was kind of coming up to you and recording in person, which was really cool and exciting.
Yeah, playing producer.
Yeah,
for a little bit.
Doing the little George Martin bit.
Yeah. Hey, play that there. No, not that. That.
The round thing.
Yeah. Thankfully, unlike some of the stuff that Steve discussed in his interview, I don't think you were quite as bad as some artists could be.
Not exactly Abbey Road, but maybe Shabby Road.
Could be.
Might be taking that joke out afterwards if I'm too cringe.
We'll see. But yeah, why don't you dive into sort of your, if you sort of on this topic of current project and obviously this new album in the works is probably one of the biggest projects you've been doing of late. So why don't you sort of dip into where that all sort of started and getting it to the stage it was when I first heard it.
Yeah, well, as we've talked about on the podcast before, and we put links to it and everything, is a couple of years ago I did an instrumental album called Straight Talker, still available on all the usual platforms. Sorry, something in my throat there. And that was obviously done during one of the lockdowns and remotely, and not really intending it to be an album, certainly to start with. It just sort of happened in the end. And then sort of around at the end of that album, I already started writing, just while I was in the flow of it, some other original tunes and kind of minute-long things and grooves mostly. And then I think it was around just over a year ago now, I actually released Straight Talker fully. I wrote it about a year before and then released a couple of singles and then finally got it released last year. And then once that was released, I started kind of really working on doing another original album with some, unlike Straight Talker, trying to get some live players on it, and with yourself in mind, and our friend Ashley Squires as well, who's based over here in Lincolnshire. So that was kind of the start of it, and I think on my YouTube channel, which hopefully you're watching this on, there are a couple of short sort of instrumentally tunes on my YouTube channel that possibly might be making an appearance on the album, albeit maybe a little bit longer and slightly different this time around, and with yourself on drums. And then obviously, as we've talked about on the podcast, I've been away a lot on the ships and doing that kind of thing, so I've not been able to, unlike one of the main differences of unlike Straight Talk, whereas that was kind of written in a bulk kind of period over the course of a month or whatever. With this one, it's kind of been ebbs and flows, sort of writing a tune or two, then going away for 3 months and listening back to those two tunes and then changing your opinion on it the whole time, thinking, oh, that sounds great, and then a month later going, oh, I don't like that now, and then coming back and write another 2 tunes, and so on and so forth. And but yeah, so in the summer of last year, I had a session with, as I mentioned, Ashley Squires, and put some guitar on, which he came over here for. So that was like doing the in-person thing. And then I think I sent over you some of the tracks, and so you could get some ideas for what what you thought they needed. And then I think sort of gave you a kind of idea of the sounds that I wanted. And I think one of the main things going over to yours with the tracks was sort of working out the drum sounds. And I know we worked on a lot of different snares and stuff, and so over to you for sort of your
so my kind of process, if you like, was as you say, you sent a few of the tunes over. I don't think I got all of them. I think I got a smattering of, which I had a little listen to. And yeah, my sort of way of working was to kind of have a listen and just quick chart them out. Sit here with a bit of manuscript paper and literally just write an arrangement chart. Just says an A section, a B section, what happens, is there any little figures that I need to try and catch that I would write in, is there any initial thoughts that I might got the ride cymbal there, or I might put a fill in there, or there might be a solo here, or whatever it may be, and little dynamic things if there's a fade out at the end that I need to know to keep playing through, so that you can fade it in post, or also if there's like anything, quiet sections, more dynamic sections, crescendos, everything like that, I try and put onto a chart. And then that's my kind of, I would just think of it like a roadmap. So it's like that's the roadmap of that song, and how I get from A to B is what we work out when we do it. Where we start, and what you might be hearing, or what you put on the drum machine on the original that you then go, well, I liked some of that, but I didn't like the way it was doing this. And then we try and get something together. And then as for sounds, I have a pretty small recording setup. It's not a very spacious studio, as you well know. But I've got, I think at the time when we were doing your session, we probably had 8 snare drums in here to choose from, which I would call enough. But it was we just, for different things, or things like wood shells, metal shells, vintage ones, some ones that'll give you a bit of a brighter tone, a darker tone. And I think for most of your stuff, we kind of settled on 4 drums in the end. I think we settled on this maple Craviotto solid shell, which is my kind of favourite for recording anyway. It just gives a really nice all-round tight sound. And then we put a really heavy DW edge on that we tuned well low to get that really 70s sort of fat thing going, which I know you were a big fan of. So that got quite a bit of use on a few tunes. And then I think there was one tune that we used an old Ludwig on, just for something different. And then I think the couple that you were kind of going for a Tony Thompson chic sort of thing. We got I got a brass 70s Gretsch out and tuned it up a bit, so it had a bit more of a pop to it. And so I think that was sort of the sound, snare wise. That was the sound. Bass drum and toms we didn't really change too much, and I think for the most part the cymbals were pretty consistent. I think we might have swapped the ride cymbal out a couple of times, or put on some sizzle cymbals with rivets in, or little odd effects things, and that was about it sound wise. So really for your stuff it was a fairly straightforward, you weren't after a really dead drum sound or a really jazzy tone or anything. You wanted a nice sort of classic bass and toms, and nothing too far from the ordinary, which was good. And I swap the kits around in here occasionally. So, but for your stuff, I put up a kit that I kind of knew would be cover everything. That would just, whether we were doing retro-y stuff or quite modern stuff, I could get what I wanted out of it. So that was the sort of my approach to getting a setup going and getting a sound in my head. But obviously, I didn't know what you wanted to hear, so we had a lot of conversations.
Yeah, well, one of the things that was great about recording in person, doing all that was, and what's funny about it is because as I think we've touched on before, and again is I think on your YouTube channel and on mine are some of the other projects we'd worked on in lockdown together, and with my album, again with this one, it'll be sent off to be mixed and mastered professionally and all that kind of thing, but but with all those other projects, it's obviously been us doing a rough mix and stuff. And one of the things I kind of, after having done the session with you, was working on sort of filters and compressors and stuff like that, and kind of getting back into the flow of what I used to do on some of the projects we did. And I think one of the things I did straight away was sort of fatten out even more like the snare sound and double track like the snares and the kick drum, just to give it a more all round, and then panned it like to just to give it a more thicker and full sound. And as we've sort of been talking about before recording and stuff, like some of the stuff is just captured that, especially with some of the tunes, that kind of late 70s sort of Steely Dan, Chic, all that kind of thing just right off the bat. And one of the things that I was just thinking about myself, which might be an inside sort of tidbit thing, but you may correct me on this because I know you're very knowledgeable on this, is something I was reading about the recording thing is on, I think they say apparently on like Staying Alive and on some of those Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson things that they did, was like they'd get a bar of something that J.R. Robertson would play on one of the tracks, and then they just repeat that groove over some of them. So in the verses or something, it would just be the same 2-bar phrase or 4-bar phrase being played over,
like making
and that's
a loop,
how they got
basically.
the sound. Yeah.
And I mean, there's a great example of that is Electric Light Orchestra, Don't Bring Me Down.
Yeah,
that was Jeff Lynne took a drum loop, put loads of reverb on it, made it sound really massive, and then laid 10 guitar tracks down, all doing exactly the same thing, then added the bass and everything else. But it was all based around a 2-bar loop, I think, from another song that he was working on. And he just took those 2 bars, looped them round, and put loads and loads of processing on them.
Yeah.
And this is still analog days, so it would have, it probably would have been a tape loop, an analog effects and everything to get that sound. And I think at the time, I remember hearing in an interview, I think the band thought he was nuts. Didn't know what he was working on until he laid all the harmonies on, and it kind of then sounded like a song, and not this weird riff that he was working with. Down, 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 over and over again.
Yeah, well, he's one of the great producers and sort of innovators as well. But it's like, I know with my last album, obviously it was a lot of mostly loops and software stuff, and it's like that was kind of, again, getting into the flow of the recording with you and then doing rough mixes. It's like, some of them have got that more sort of rough, light throwback to the 70s. Some of those things, like the Funk Brothers and stuff, are all recording in one studio, which is obviously like sometimes like the dream thing. It's not done as much these days, I don't think. But
it's a shame it's gone that way, because there is nothing like doing it on the floor, and especially getting drums and bass down, I think, on the floor is a really nice thing to do. And it's not, even when I do the Dainties albums, we never do that. It's always, I'll be playing with a click and a guitar, rhythm guitar and a guide vocal that's being played live in the control room, but there's no bass on there. It's like sort of as stripped back as you can get. It's just me thrashing away with a click track going, piling down my cans and a guitar and a bit of vocal, and that's it. And basically when Martin's doing that, he's talking me through the song as we're playing it. He's telling me we're going to go to a chorus, or there's going to be a piano solo here eventually, or there's going to be something going on. And so it's all that happens, where, especially with the sort of stuff you do, it would, one day maybe it would be really nice to be in the same room playing together at the same time to get that really, that feel, that you just can't quite get. You can get pretty close, but you can't quite match. That you're going to go for something and I'll be going with you, or vice versa.
Yeah. I mean, that's like one of the sort of the tiers that it goes in. It's like the most comfortable, and as we sort of talked about in the Steve Pearce thing with what people like him ended up doing in the lockdown, and as what we started on, and what we mostly do is like home recording and just get your stuff sent over, and you're in the comfort of your own studio or your bedroom or whatever, a garage, and just you can record that way. And then the next step up was like coming, either Ash Squires coming over here recording, or going to his and then going to yours, and then like like you say, it's like you can get somewhat close because, well, like with the stuff that you played, as you know, it was like all the way through each. It wasn't like, although we did a tiny bit of cutting and splicing certain things to try out different fills or whatever, it was all like one take straight through, and then like doing the post-mortem after.
Yeah.
But
judging which bits were worthy of being kept.
Yeah. But yeah, one of the cool things was as well, I mean, and that's the thing when you're writing the tunes, and as you say, you have an idea in your head of what you want them to sound like, or especially when you're just working them out as you go, and then you get other people playing on it, and they might hear it differently. And I know that's something I've talked about before with people, is sort of them saying, oh, this, I'd probably play that differently or whatever, and then you kind of go, oh yeah, that is right. And like with the stuff on this album, there was a few sections that I weren't particularly happy with, like coming out of solos or whatever. It didn't sound organic enough yet, or like as it would sound live, and then getting you to play the drums on it, and then just the amazing thing, like what a fill can do, or a fill that you played that went, like you say, with what the bass was doing, or what the guitar was doing, or the keyboard, and how that could just make that section suddenly, now that feels into place now.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, there was a few times, I think one definite occasion, where what we both heard were pretty different, but we tried them. And I think there was one occasion you were pretty set on there was going to be a fill with a crash cymbal, and I just said, well, what happens if we take the crash cymbal out and we don't put one there, and we don't put a big fill, we put just something really simple and leave a bit of space? And it's something you hadn't sort of considered when you were writing it, because you thought, well, Phil has to fill the bar, most of the time, but leaving a beat of space or a breath before you do something can actually really, for me, it's a good way of putting something like tension and release into a piece of music.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like since it's amazing as well after then having stuff like, there's one of them on the album, like a real sort of 70s disco. I think it might be one of the Tony Thompson kind of influenced ones, and Bernard Edwards, and like just it was one of those things again, coming out of a solo and leaving that gap. And it now, since recording with you, and then kind of trying to redo some of the bass bits, and because most of it's in demo form at the moment still, and will get redone and get sort of permanently put on, but so kind of trying to redo some of the bass things and try different things. It's amazing how much now what you've done influences what I play, and now I hear the solo totally different, and coming out of like that solo with that gap, just it makes I think I'll play a slide there instead, or I won't. I'll try and hook on to what your drum's doing there, and it can totally influence the other way I hear it and change it.
Well, that's the good thing about doing it this way, that it's, sometimes when you do remote recording, or at least when I do, everything else is set, and then they just layer my part in. If it's a singer-songwriter who's laid the piano, the bass, the drum, the guitar, the vocals, and everything down, sometimes even harmonies, and then they come, this happened last week with a Dainty thing, and then I laid the drums down, and the guitar solos were laid down at the same time that I was laying the drums down, just here, and then the guitarist was doing it in his studio, and then it all went together. But the guitarist didn't know what I'd played, I didn't know what he was playing, but what was already done was pretty much set in stone, was what was going to be done on the final recording. Whereas with you, it's more of a, like we said before, it's a working version that there's bits that I might put on that we decide later on, you listen back to and you think, oh, I would do that a little bit differently now, knowing, or, you've sent me little mixes back where you've changed a few things around that you've done, and I go, oh, well, now you're doing that, I should be doing this. And it's going to be that constant back and forth of trying to match things together. And the tracks, although they were good when you were up, there's definitely going to be a few that'll get done again on my end of things between now and when they all get sent off to be mixed.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as well, there's still stuff that needs to go on. Some of them, as you know, like the keys and sort of brass on some of them, and vocals and on a couple of the tracks, and so then there again there'll probably be another change there. One of the things I know that we've talked about ourselves and is going to be happening as well is then having another session probably for percussion, and then again that'll influence, as you said, like the drums and probably the bass and everything as well.
There's
again.
Definitely, if we're laying percussion on stuff, there'll be things I'll decide. I might say to you, oh well, that 16th note hi-hat thing will make that 8th or even quarter notes if we're putting a shaker or a tambourine on, because otherwise it feels like it's too much of that thing. And actually, it's something I much prefer, is having a 16th note played by something else, and then the hi-hat can sit back in a bit. Just to listen to it sounds, some 16th note hi-hat things can sound, for me, a bit frantic. They can sound a little bit rushy, and it's hard to pull them to sort of sit, especially when you're trying to make it a laid back kind of groove. People like J.R. Robinson are the master of making 16ths feel, as laid back as you can get, just because of the way that he plays them. And so trying to get a little bit of that in, and you've seen my my room full of random percussion instruments and bits and pieces that can be called upon for different things, and so yeah, there'll be all sorts of stuff we might try out. I've heard of I was talking to a drummer recently, and he was on about a lot of sessions that he does. He ends up laying down like a baron Irish drum alongside a drum track. Not that you're going to hear it in the final mix, but it just adds a bit of a low-end rumble, to lift a track. And I thought that was a really clever idea. And just little things like that I'm sure you're the same. I'm always trying to learn and pick up little ideas and little tips that you think, oh, I'll use that at some point.
Yeah, I know one of the things funnily enough, I think we're giving out some really interesting little tidbits here and behind the scenes. One of the things I was hearing about the other day was on the Pet Sounds album, which obviously everybody sort of knows how revolutionary and trying different things and weird things on that album. One of the things they got in Wouldn't It Be Nice was Brian Wilson wanted a really fat badum sound to kick into the verse, I think, and Hal Blaine wasn't kind of getting it as the way he was hearing it, And so what? Something. Well, forgive him for forgetting his name, but the percussionist or one of the percussionists on that session did was play the timpani along with the floor with the toms and the to fatten it out, and it's like a timpani on a pop like song, or like certainly at the time a pop song, and it's like, and it sounds great, and you'd never kind of maybe not know that, but it's one of those things that you try and it's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, same with the Beatles. I nicked a really big trick from, funnily enough, Paul McCartney playing tambourine on the Hey Bulldog sessions, I think it was. And he had two tambourines and he was bashing them together. Which you look at that and you think that's going to be pointless. But it's when you try it, you go, actually, it really bigs the sound up. So funnily enough, on the last Dainties album, we put some tambourine down, and I got two tambourines just to fatten up the backbeat, and it works. You know, it's a really interesting way of doing it, and I think I've spoken about it in one of my one of the Dainties Diaries blog posts that I put up about those sessions, and I went into it a little bit more of how I used that particular technique and where I completely ripped off the idea from. And there's some great footage of Paul McCartney in the studio. I think he's got two Ludwig tambourines. There was a brass one, which was really heavy, and a wooden one, and you could just see he had tea towels wrapped around to stop blistering on his hands. And it was like that, and it was seeing that kind of thing, and you just think, oh, I wouldn't have thought to do that. You know, you know, there's a million ways to play a tambourine that you don't realise until you start trying to find different sound avenues, and it's that same thing of how can you make this sound a bit more unique, you know, because there is, you know, not to sound, it can sound a bit predictable putting a tambourine on something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That everyone's just going to play the same pattern.
Yeah.
And loop it for 5 minutes. So actually being able to do things slightly differently and change patterns. I like, my favourite thing for tambourine is offbeats, you know, 2 and 4 maybe on a verse, and then putting it up to full 8ths or 16ths in a chorus, so that you go from that sort of subtle just with a snare drum to getting a broad sounding tambourine.
Yeah, and I know it's funny, like you were saying about the 16th note thing with the tambourine. I know that's one of the things that you mentioned when we were recording, because obviously with it being sort of like some of them being really 70s influence, there's a lot of that going on. I mean, I know on one of the tracks there's sort of a triangle thing that's sort of one of my favourite of all time sort of disco sounds, is that open and closed triangle thing. But yeah, I know on one of the tracks in particular you said about, I think the hi-hat doesn't need to be doing that here, and it should be a tambourine. I think like, because I think one of them in particular, that on the software thing there already was a tambourine doing it as well, and like in the whole mix of it all, it just sounded fine to me. And then when you soloed it out and showed me what it sounded like, it's like, oh yeah, that's totally clashing. And like and being able to play it live as well, like you say, you can just play around, and I was like, yeah, that's totally right. And you even mentioned that you quoted, I think, was it Steve Gadd who was the same, or who did a session?
Yeah, I heard a story of a Steve Gadd session. I can't remember where this came from, so apologies if it's someone who's listening. It was them who told me it, because
Steve Pearce.
It could well have been a Steve Pearce or a Neil Wilkinson story, but it was they'd heard about him doing a session for someone, and this, whoever it was hell bent on getting 16th note hi-hat. Absolutely needs to be that. And there was a shaker going on, and the shaker was already laid down and playing the beat 1 as an accent. So 1, and what he said to them is, he said, shift that along so it moves the accent to the 2 and the 4. So to fill that space out. And then he said, I'm going to play quarter notes. And they went, no, we want 16th notes. But he said, let me play quarter notes, and if you want 16th notes, I'll do them after. You know, we can do it again. And you just went and you just laid down really simple quarter notes, and it sounded great. and they went, oh, that's it, you know. And it's because he'd moved the accent of the shaker so that it wasn't accenting the downbeat, it was accenting the upbeats. And I was like, that's really clever. You know, it was just, he could hear that, and he just had to. Because the thing with being like when you're at that level of session musician, it's all about diplomacy.
Yeah,
you've got to be diplomatic in how you tell someone, you know, to try this maybe, or to, you know, because you don't ever want to turn around to anyone and go, I think this will be better. But you can go, why don't we try doing it this way, and then doing it another way.
I mean, I think as well the thing is, like, sort of like these guys like Steve Gadd's and your Steve Pearce's and you know, whoever it is, like on these big sessions, it's obviously big money things, and like the ones we were talking about when you do have several people in on the session, and as Steve Pearce was kind of telling us about on the last episode about the sort of pressure and the weird energy that goes around with it, and so yeah, it can be more like that. I mean, and then the project that we've been working on in my album, it's a project of love. It's like
is that the album title now? Is it?
Yeah.
Is that what you're going to call it? The Project of Love.
Making love. No,
I'll pass.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's one of those things where it's you know, it's whatever really, and we'll go in and recording with you. It's just like, it's at this moment, it's a side project that could potentially be really cool and lead to some stuff, but it's you know, like, it's so totally open to interpretation, man.
Yeah, and you know what? That's what makes it easy for any of us who are working on it for you. It makes it easy that you're open to that. You're not really close-minded of it must be exactly what the drum machine played, or the guitar part that you already put down as a guide. That's all that you want to hear. You know,
yeah.
So when someone comes in and goes, well, why don't we try this? And as you say, it can completely change the feel of a piece. Just one little adjustment for better, you know.
Yeah.
Might not, and that's okay too. You know, if we try something and it doesn't work, that's fine as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I know thinking as well of like the experimental things that you were saying as well, and trying different things, was on one of the vocal tracks, trying to get a bit sort of not psychedelic, but the sort of Steely Dan, or sort of can't think of the word, but you know, like one of those tracks where it's like written about something and you're trying to sing it in a sort of character or whatever, or like to suit the song. And I know there's in one of them there's a sort of line in it that is really like about what the track's about, and I was trying to get it so it sounded like a group of different people, but it's just me singing it, but I'm trying to like make it sound like loads of different people. So I was like looking at some of those sort of Pet Soundsy things and Beach Boys and Beatles stuff, where like I know some of them, and the 70s stuff, that they try stuff like pinching their nose or whatever, or trying to sing in a deep. I know McCartney's done stuff where he's tried to sing in a deep gravelly voice, because that's usually not what he sounds like, and he tries to sound like someone else. So you know, if you listen to the album, see if you can work out which track that is, where I'm trying to sound like.
There's a game for everyone to play.
Barry White. Yeah.
But no, it's good, and it just things like that. You know, we pulled out. You know, we've got little samples of different things that you could use elsewhere. Like we took samples of my brass ship's bell being hit with a hammer. You know, just because there was somewhere on the album that might fit with something that you'd put down, and we said, well, we'll do it, and then you can play with it later. You know, stick some reverb on it, or I don't know, do whatever you want.
I've just realized the word I was looking for was concept, like a concept piece.
Avant-garde,
yeah. Psychedelic, baby.
Yeah.
Like my shirt.
But yeah, I wasn't going to mention it, but since you brought it up, yeah.
Yeah, so fingers crossed that album should, well, certainly starting to release a couple of the tracks early summer, maybe. Sort of June, July
this year.
time. Yeah, sometime in my lifetime.
Yeah. Sometime in the not too distant future. Is that vague enough for you?
Yeah. Sometime after this episode is out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, on that note, we could sort of we'll wrap this one up a bit, and And yeah, go and check out Ashley's album if you haven't listened to it already. And also, if you want to hear some of the Dainties stuff we were talking about, the Dainties have got a new album out as well called You Belong to Blue, available over on Bandcamp. And of course, go and check out any previous Groovecast episodes that you may or may not have missed, or either on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and I believe we're also on Google Podcasts now.
Oh, and I reckon possibly when we release this episode, we can release a couple of photos of that session at yours, and maybe I'll release some stuff of me recording this, although I know I won't be releasing the bloopers just yet. I have recorded some bloopers of me recording this album, which will need to be bleeped out.
Oh, well, I'm sure we've all got something to look forward to there then.
Yeah, and then obviously next episode is our last one of season 2.
Yeah, we'll hopefully have to... I'd love to say we've got something special planned, but we haven't got that far yet.
Yeah, take it each episode as it comes.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, thanks very much for listening and for watching if you're watching on my YouTube channel. And we'll see you next time on Groovecast.
See you later.